welcome to today's episode. I'm really excited today to talk to Becco, one of the hosts of the Value Investors TV podcast. And my name is Alex Mason. I'm with the Stock Stories podcast. And today we're just going to have a little conversation about value investing and kind of where we came from as investors, how we got into this, and just some lessons learned along the way that hopefully can help you. So yeah, Becco, thanks for joining me tonight and being a part of this conversation.
No, Alex, thank you for first of all reaching out. It was really kind of you to reach out, and it's awesome to have this conversation with you today. I hope both my audience and your audience gets to know each other's podcasts and see what we've created for the investment community. So really excited to have this conversation today.
Oh yeah, for sure. And I'm excited because I was looking for more investing shows, like I don't know about you, we'll get to it in a moment, but the whole reason I started Stock Stories was I was just craving more investing podcasts out there that were a little bit different and I couldn't find any. So I started mine and I was still wanted more. So I started looking for more shows and I came across yours, and what you guys are doing is really great. And, I think we think about businesses in a lot of the similar ways. So I think it's really cool.
No, I agree. I agree with you. I think we'll get into this more, but I think it's rare to find a podcast that actually goes into really details into the companies, like going into kind of the stories around the companies like you do, going into kind of the details about the valuations, competitive advantages, really analyzing it from a really fundamental standpoint. I think it is rare, and so it's good that we've connected, and yeah, excited to see what we can do together in the future as well.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So yeah, let's kick it off by learning a little bit more about you and how you got started. So I guess the first question I have for you is, first of all, tell us about what your podcast is all about.
Yeah. And before I get to that question, it would be it would be it would be you know unsatisfactory answer without mentioning that I'm only a half of the podcast. So obviously I have a co-host Hari who has been with me from the start. I mean, he's the one of the co-founders of the Value Investor TV. But long story short, Hari and I actually worked together. He was actually my boss, and we love talking about stock market, and we both had mutual interest in really playing in the stock market in a rational, fundamental way, which led us down the path of looking at the fundamentals and really analyzing companies instead of just following um, technical trading or anything of that sort. And so we decided that, why don't we put together a podcast so that our conversations could be had online and people can chime in and create this community of investors. And frankly, we started off as kind of a hobby, like a side project that might last maybe a couple of months, and then turns out here we are 3 years into it, still continuing to produce content. So that's how we got started.
Nice.
Yeah.
So like I want to know, how did that conversation go? When were you just at work one day and he mentioned stocks and your ears perked up and you just started chatting away at it? Like how did that actually happen?
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I think it's just accumulation of all these conversations that we've had. Like nowadays, obviously with COVID, people don't get to interact with each other in offices. But pre-COVID, did exist a world where you would run into your colleagues, and you would have conversations over lunch, and we would have these conversations over lunch and after work, and yeah, we were just both very interested, and frankly, I learned a lot from my co-host Hari about value investing, and and so we just decided, why don't we just put a microphone in front of us and then just publish what we have to talk about, and yeah, that's how it got started. And initially, for a lot of our listeners, they know that when we started with just teaching or sharing our understanding of investing So basically, value investing or investing 101. Learning about how to do accounting, some of the basic stuffs, and then we sort of graduated to applying those concepts to actual companies, and that's what we do now. We take a company and analyze it in part one and part two. Part one really going into more of a qualitative assessment, and then part two going into quantitative assessment. But anyway, yeah, that's how the company got. That's how the podcast got started, and yeah.
Nice. Yeah. You guys cover a lot, like a lot of concepts, like you said in some earlier episodes. And then you even have some like interviews, especially as of late, with a bunch of different investors. And I've learned some interesting things from from those interviews. One in particular that I want to talk about a little bit later. But yeah, so that's really cool. When you guys do your episodes and you're looking at different companies, do you guys have any sort of particular process that you use? Anything in particular?
Yeah, so we have a checklist. So I think people sort of misunderstand what checklist is really for. Checklist really isn't to go down a checklist and you basically check off certain things, and therefore it's very formulaic sort of in its approach. That is not what we do. What we do is we have a checklist so that we don't forget things. It's just a mental schema. It is a guidance on how to analyze a company. And so sometimes you might have to drop some things. Sometimes you might focus on one thing over others. You have to be a little bit more adaptive. But our idea is to get a comprehensive list of questions that you want to ask yourself when you're assessing a company, so that you don't forget something along the process. And so we have a checklist. You can get a copy of the checklist at info@valueinvestor.org if you don't have one already. But effectively, we basically look at first of all the company as a business. So we try to understand the competitive advantage, more of a qualitative assessment of the company, and then we go into the management. We go into the financial wealth or health of the company, looking at the balance sheet in particular. And then lastly, we go into valuation component. And so roughly those are four different buckets. And then we've got a bunch of questions underneath those buckets that we ask when we analyze a company.
Awesome. Yeah. And I know from listening to your guys' episodes that you guys really take the time to go into detail. And like you said, like that's actually pretty rare, I think, in this space still in the podcasting world. And as an investor myself, I really appreciate the detail you guys go into.
Yeah.
So thank you for that.
No.
And
Why don't
yeah,
I take the turn to ask you some questions, Alex?
yeah, let's do it.
Yeah. So tell us about your podcast.
Yeah. So I host the Stock Stories podcast. And my whole mission is to empower individual investors by decoding the business behind the stock, which, as we know, is really similar to your guys' mission. And just really trying to understand what do the businesses actually do? Where is the money coming from? I was always intrigued, reading prospectuses of different funds and my company's 401k, like, okay, what's actually in here? What's actually gonna let me retire one day and provide for my family? And so the podcast was really born out of that curiosity and just wanting to know more about the sources of the returns. And one of my goals in the show is to study all of the companies in the S&P 500, and we're about 100 companies in so far. So we've been making great progress, and I've just learned so much about the American economy. It's crazy. But then aside from just the case studies that I do, I also love to study mental models. And as we know from, someone we both look up to, Charlie Munger, mental models are so key for just rational decision making. And I felt like there wasn't a lot of talk about that in the podcast world. And so I have episodes talking about mental models too. And just to kind of inform our decision making process as investors, like how do we actually think about things? It's kind of similar to your guys' checklist, but maybe in more of a broad sense. And just trying to think about how to frame things from a different perspective when we're thinking about making investments. So that's the basics of what the show is about.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. In terms of, one of the things that you mentioned there is like the number of case studies that you've gone through. It's pretty wild to think about when I run into a company that I've never heard of before, and I crack 10K open, and it turns out they're multi-billion-dollar business, thriving business somewhere out in America, and you realize how big the economy is. Like on the surface, obviously there are companies that are really in the limelight nowadays. Obviously, with tech companies sort of in the limelight, you got Google, Facebook, whatever. But then outside of that limelight, you have a thriving economy in different diverse industries, and I really feel that this is really the engine of America. This is how kind of this sort of the power of America, and going through that really gets you to understand what powers this company or this country, and kind of the spirit of it of capitalism. So I think that's super awesome that you guys are going through that. And in terms of the mental model, absolutely, like that's something that I've always wanted to do and wanted to learn more about mental models. It sort of like compresses things down into um, understandable kind of chunks. And yeah, as an investor, as Charlie Munger always talks about, mental models are super important. Another thing that you mentioned is you really go into the stories, the stories behind these companies and their history. So talk a little bit more about that.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. I think when I started the podcast, I very much came at it. So I'm an engineer, aerospace engineer by trade, and like I think very analytically, and I think kind of like you, I'm very into like numbers and that kind of thing. So when I first started, it was just me wanting to share the facts and the things that I learned. But what I realized was there's often these really rich narratives that run through not just the histories of these companies, but the current events and the potential future events of these businesses as well. And I think that those stories need to be told, not just because they're entertaining, but because they actually help us invest better. Like learning about the fact that, for example, what's a good example? Coca-Cola comes to mind. A single share of Coca-Cola bought, I think at the IPO would have become well over $10 million. And in fact, is a whole town in Florida called Quincy, Florida, that is made up of Coca-Cola millionaires because there is this cultural narrative around the shares of stock being so valuable that when the Great Depression hit, people held on to their shares while they were getting rid of all these other things, because guess what? They were making so much in dividends from their Coke shares, and that actually helped that town prosper. So like learning little nuggets like that, little stories can help, I think, lead as clues to what are the excellent businesses out there and how can we capitalize upon that as investors. There's just so many examples out there, and also just learning more about like why the dominant businesses of today are actually dominant, I think is so key. Like you guys talk about competitive advantage all the time. Like why did McDonald's thrive to become the number one restaurant in the world? Well, like they practically invented the drive-through. They were obsessed with efficiency. Ray Kroc tilted the seats in the restaurant up at an angle to make them uncomfortable for guests so he could have a higher turnaround time or quicker turnaround time for his customers. Like he was thinking about all this stuff, and kind of combining the entrepreneurial story, usually of the founder, is what I've seen with the actual business model that helped that company thrive. I think can really inform how we look at investments today and take greater stock in, okay, were the things that were true before still true as far as informing an investment decision, or have things changed for the better or for the worse? And so I think there's just so much to be gained as an investor just to learn about the narrative component.
I 100% agree with you. I think that it really gives me chill thinking about that story about the Florida town. It's just like the nuggets like that, or like the angle of the chair, like the small little details that you basically miss if you don't really dive into the story behind the companies. The fact that you're sort of unearthing that, and it's a hero's tale almost. It's like these entrepreneurs who started this company and had to think about all these different things and puzzle together a business model with like all the supply chain and everything else that's involved in erecting a company, unearthing those conversations that they might have had when they had to make that decision. I think that's super super awesome that you're doing that. Yeah, as an entrepreneur myself, I can appreciate that even more. The fact that you're sort of unearthing some of that story that goes behind, you know, great companies, like you mentioned there.
Oh yeah, like you know exactly what I'm talking about, and it's just a wonderful thing to think about. And I also think it's necessary too, because I think a lot about new investors, as I'm sure new investors come across your show just like they come across mine, and a lot of times I feel like our job as podcasters and as investors who are podcasters is to make it real for them. Make investing real for the person who's listening. And to me, that comes down to linking it to the story. Like, what does the business do for them? Like, 298 out of 300 American households have a Procter and Gamble product in them. Like, everybody can relate to that at some level because we're all customers. And so, yeah, like when I say Procter and Gamble and like talk about balance sheets, now it actually means a little bit more something because I got the Old Spice deodorant in my bathroom right now, and like I'm looking at it in the morning, like, oh yeah, like I guess I do use this every day.
Yeah, exactly.
Like there's so much there.
Exactly. I had a former hedge fund manager slash sort of now retired, but now turned writer on my podcast, and he described investing as a narrative. It's like you're an author, and not really an author, but you're almost like a spectator of an author. And company, all it is it's just an agent that's writing its own story. So you have to really understand where it's coming from, its motivation, and where it's going. And the whole thing is a drama, right? You have like competitors trying to basically trying to, cut your knees, and you got employees that you need to satisfy, and the customers that you need to satisfy, and you got real people behind these companies. And the way he framed it as that, like, company is really just an agent that's writing its own story. There's a protagonist, and sort of that narrative around the company. I thought was really powerful. It sort of goes to show the importance of understanding the narrative behind these companies, because it really, like you said, allows you to kind of be in the shoes of the operator, but also as a consumer, and you get to kind of tie it all together, which makes things a lot more contextualized. Um, so yeah, that's great. I'd like to move on to another question, Alex, if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure.
So you talked about your full time job. I think it would be a good opportunity to let listeners know, your listeners and my listeners know, what you do during your full time. What do you do outside of podcasting? So give us a little bit more, shine some light on your day in the life of Alex outside of podcasting.
Well, so I've always loved math and science and just learning about the world ever since I was really young. And I wanted to be an inventor. That's what I wanted to be when I grew up. And that ended up leading to a career in engineering. So what I do now is I'm an aerospace engineer, and I've been doing that for several years. And it's just really, really fun to like help create things that are cool and to you know, help make planes fly basically. And even not just planes, like that's another thing I learned when I got into the industry is like there's so much more than just planes. That's what everyone thinks about. But there's space products, there's lasers, there's moving things. Like there's all this whole industry surrounding it. But yeah, so I'm an aerospace engineer by day, and podcaster by night, and and so yeah, so it's really fun for me. But yeah, Becca, why don't you tell us about yourself and what you do outside of the podcast?
Sure, yeah. So I am a co-founder of a company called Virgils, which is a very little startup. We just started early this year, myself and my co-founder, and it's about taking VR into the healthcare market, and so we allow facilitators, therapists, meditation practitioners, breathwork practitioners to facilitate group therapy inside VR. So that's what I do. Again, it's a little baby startup. We just started early this year, and yeah, really excited to sort of make this happen. I think a lot of people are suffering from mental illness, mental health issues, and even if it's not categorized as mental health, just mental wellness, generally speaking, I think is an issue nowadays, and even more so progressively. And underneath that symptom is really the aspect of connection. I think people feel disconnected from the community, and our thesis is that you can really return to VR. You can really return to reality through virtual reality. So through virtual reality, you can connect with people again in ways that you couldn't have done in reality. And so that's our thesis. And yeah, so we're excited to kind of make that happen for people.
That's so cool. So how did you gotta tell me like how you came up with the idea,
Oh man.
because that's like it seems super advanced and super niche and like forward thinking. Like what informed that choice to create the company?
Oh man. That would be kind of kind of longer discussion, but look, to keep it short. So I've been in the healthcare tech business for a while. First working with Hari, developing clinical decision support dashboard for emergency physicians and ICU physicians, and then moved on to creating AI imaging platform for radiologists and other physicians who are taking care of patients to make them more efficient, and to increase the accuracy of the diagnosis, things like that. And so I've been in the industry for a while, and myself and my co-founder have always wanted to do something new and innovative, and that really provides a lot of value for people. And so we sort of joined forces last year, and really started to dig into some of the problems of healthcare in this country. And there are many, right? I mean, healthcare system is completely broken in this country, and we thought a really good market to tackle, given the timing and everything that COVID has taught us in terms of going digital and mental health issues really being top of mind for a lot of people. We wanted to tackle this space, yeah, and we thought that VR was really a special medium to make that happen, and yeah, so that's kind of the thesis there.
That's awesome. Yeah, I'm excited to learn more about it because I'm just thinking, even just from the investor perspective, like, you hear so many things about artificial intelligence, and, for you as someone who's actually doing it, you're helping create technologies around that and combining that with, healthcare is obviously so important in society, and all the different things that are needed there, like you're alluding to.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I think that's really cool.
Yeah, thank you, Alex. It's a baby startup. Obviously, there's a lot of risk, and I know I just said a whole bunch of buzzwords: AI, VR, blah blah blah. Throw in big data and blockchain in there. I think it sort of completes it. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of hype around it. So right now the focus is to really keep our head down and build a product that's actually going to deliver value for people. So anyway, enough of my full-time job. If you guys are interested, definitely reach out. I'd be happy to talk more about that. So let's move on to another question, Alex.
All right.
So I think this would be really interesting for folks. You've been a podcast for a while now. So any insights or lessons learned from running your podcast that you would like to share with your audience?
Ooh, insights from running the podcast. I would say one of them is, geez, there's just so much to learn.
Yeah.
There's just so much to learn. I
Yeah.
mean, I don't know if I fully comprehended, um, I guess, the mission I was embarking on when I started it, but I think that's true of a lot of people, maybe true of you as
Yeah.
well. Like you said, you and Hari started your podcast as kind of a side hustle, and it grew into this passion. Um, I would say one thing that I've learned from just like the podcasting angle of it is that, hmm, I would say that communicating ideas is such a useful and powerful skill,
Mm.
and one that I struggle with every day. But I think it's so worth it because like I've learned so much about investing and about sharing investing concepts, and I also get to help people, and in turn those people that I help can help other people by then sharing those same ideas in their own words.
Mm.
So I think like combining that perspective with just the skill of learning how to share ideas and how to like distill, say, like all this information in a 10K report and come up with like, all right, these are the 5 most important things out of that report. And learning how to sift through information and be discerning with it, I think has been just like amazing.
Mm.
And I'm really grateful for the opportunity to like develop that. So that's what I would say on the podcasting side for sure.
Mm.
Yeah. What's been most helpful or transformative for you, like as a podcaster?
Oh man, like you said, there was a lot to learn, and I make mistakes a lot on my podcast. I stumble, and I'm cognizant of what I say, even more so when I'm on, when I'm actually recording. And so, I mean, just generally, there's a lot to learn, and I'll say a couple things. I think podcast allows me to more, on a selfish reason, allows me to stay disciplined on and actually like doing the work and making sure that, like you said, that my words come out clearly. I'm articulating things correctly. I think these things are very useful skills generally, but then you're forced to exercise those skills when you're in front of a camera, in front of a microphone. So I think, on a selfish reason, I think that has been really, really good for me. And then I think secondarily, a lot of the stuff that I put in, I mean, I put in a lot of hours in doing research and finding partners to do interviews with, like yourself. But all the effort that goes into it. When I receive one or two emails from our listeners saying that this really, your podcast really changed how I look at investing, and they're basically pouring their hearts out and writing that they can now they can now they now have the agency to make decisions for themselves, and this subtle these feedback, they're not subtle feedbacks, but they're like really heartfelt feedback. It's really touching, and that's really what gets me going. And I don't know, I just love to share the knowledge, because anyone can do this. Like, anyone can pick up a book and start learning, and you got a lot of resources like your podcast, my podcast, and I think I just feel a great sense of gratitude and almost a sense of obligation and mission to let people know about this idea of investing, and the fact that you can do it on your own, with some help, of course. But yeah, I get a lot of pleasure out of that, and yeah. Anyway, I
Oh
rambled there
yeah.
for a second. Sorry.
No, I
Yeah.
mean that's perfect. I mean, you and me both. Like it's so amazing. I mean, honestly, I come back to the concept of compounding just as a general thinking concept at least twice a year, and just really just sit and think about it, and I'm just in awe every time I think about it, and I always just want to share it again with like people I'm talking to on the podcast or not, because yeah, investing, it really is that transformative. Like it really changes people's lives, and it can change anyone who's listening's life just as it's changing ours. You know, like tell us a little bit about. I just curious, like what was your first investment and like how did that come about?
My first investment. Oh, let's see. My first investment in the stock market was. Man, I have to think. I think it was Macy's. I think it was Macy's, but I'm not
Okay.
100% sure about that. Yeah, I think it was Macy's because I think it was. I don't remember when it was, but there was a buying opportunity that I thought was really nice because there was like too much of a scare around the fact that it's going to go bankrupt and like the underlying assets. It was kind of like a cigar butt play, in that even if the whole company were to fall apart, you still have the real estate that was part of the balance sheet that people didn't really value as much because it was completely discounted. And so that was kind of that sort of play. That's what comes to mind. I don't think it's actually my first investment, but anyway, I'll just give you that as an
Oh
answer.
man. Nice. Yeah, I was gonna say, man, this guy was on his Benjamin Graham on day one,
No,
like
probably not. Yeah, yeah,
on your Seth Klarman going for cigar butts. That's pretty
yeah.
advanced. Like,
How
yeah.
about yourself, Alex?
Oh man, I mean, I took the easy way out.
But
I went for the most predictable company ever because I figured I couldn't screw it up, and if I did screw it up, then the world had bigger problems. So I put some money into Coca-Cola
oh
for
yeah,
the first time several years ago, and
nice,
of course that's many people's first investment.
nice.
Um, but that was just kind of a one-time thing. I didn't invest actually for a couple of years after that, but then I was so thirsty to invest, but my wife and I, were kind of like on this big debt payoff journey, like really trying to learn personal finance and budgeting. And like, there just wasn't the same excess cash flow for investing that like I really wanted. So every paycheck I would take $10, and there used to be this platform called Loyal3. It doesn't exist anymore, but you could take $10 and buy like Berkshire Hathaway stock
Mm,
with it. So every paycheck I would put $10 into Berkshire Hathaway.
nice.
So that's what I say is really my first investment.
Gotcha, gotcha.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's always fun to kind of think back to all the mistakes that you've made, and you start cringing. Oh Jesus. Yeah. So I think let's round out this episode with the last question. I think this is a good one. Who do you look up to most? And this can be in investing or generally, yeah, personally, professionally.
Oh man, that's kind of a hard one, but I do have someone who if I could meet them in person, that would just be incredible, and that would be Charlie Munger.
Mm,
And I think for a few reasons. Number one, he's an incredible investor and obviously has a high level of skill that I really respect. Another reason is that he just really seems like a renaissance
mm,
man, and he's so good at so many different things. He's really sharp. He's able to connect ideas. He really believes in mental models as a way of life, and that just really resonated with me when I learned about that. And so, yeah, I would love to meet Charlie Munger, and he has a great biography. It's called Damn Right. For anyone who hasn't read it, check that book out. But yeah, I really look up to Charlie Munger. I think he's a really complete thinker. He also has an investing style that I really vibe with, which is going for really excellent businesses and making more concentrated bets and just really understanding the quality of the businesses you're investing in. So for those reasons, I just really vibe with a lot of the things that he said and done in his lifetime. So I definitely say Charlie Munger.
awesome. Yeah, Charlie
Yeah.
Munger is fantastic. Definitely someone that I definitely look up to, especially the fact that you mentioned the polymath aspect of Charlie, the fact that he knows all these things. I mean, the guy basically just sits there and reads all day long, and he just knows so much about so many things. So it's really awesome.
Oh yeah.
You know.
So who do you look up to?
So I'm going to say it is very cliche. I know because I'm in San Francisco, Silicon Valley, but I'm going to say Steve Jobs because Steve Jobs right now, at least right now, I mean, obviously things change. I've looked up to other people, but right now, really Steve Jobs because he is a great operator. I mean, this guy is a great entrepreneur, right? He started Apple and then got kicked out, and then now he finds Next and Pixar. I mean, these companies. I mean, the guy basically founded Pixar and Apple. I mean, these are basically household names across the world, and they still exist, and they're thriving companies. And so, and for me as a budding entrepreneur, just starting out, a lot of the things that he preach, really focusing on customers, really deriving a lot of the product design principles from the customer, asking about what they want, but also at the same time infusing some of your knowledge and some of your belief systems into the product design, really being stringent on quality, really obsessing over details, and really making sure that the product is really complete. Yeah, for all those reasons, I think Steve Jobs is an amazing guy. He's also a great orator. I mean, the guy can speak. I mean, that guy is a charismatic guy. And frankly, the best type, best kind of investors are kind of investors that really concentrate their wealth into a single thing, one or two things. And, Steve Jobs basically concentrated all of his energy on creating his company, Apple, which is now, one of the one of the best, one of the biggest companies out there in the world. And so I think it just goes to show, like, you sort of have to be, like, to your point about finding really great companies and placing your bets in a small few, jives well with me as well. And also as an entrepreneur, the fact that he has done that himself, I think, jives with me even more. So yeah, I'd say Steve Jobs.
Oh yeah, yeah. Steve Jobs is great. It's wonderful that you mentioned him too, because I happened across a YouTube video a couple days ago. I've been doing like research into like how to tell stories better for the show, and I came across actually someone was interviewing him about Pixar and like their process. And to your point, he's just so articulate. He just goes in
Yeah.
and just tells it like it is in just a really eloquent way. And I think very few people have that wonderful combination of an awesome ability to communicate, but also just this super relentless drive to create and really great talent as a technologist and as someone who builds things. Like he really was like both the visionator visionary and the operator.
Yeah.
He was really kind of both, I think. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So definitely, yeah, I agree with all the points. Obviously, he had some shadows as well. We all know, but yeah, I mean, everybody has some flaws. But for what it's worth, I mean, he created a $1 trillion company, and it's still growing like crazy. So, and I am recording this podcast on, MacBook Pro. So
There you go.
yeah, exactly. Awesome. Well, this was great, Alex. Thanks for the
Yeah.
chat. Yeah.
Yeah, awesome conversation. I always love learning where other investors come from and like how they think. You just see so many parallels.
Yeah. So we have a couple more episodes in the pipeline for our listeners. So in the next episode and the episode after that, we're actually going to pick a company and do a deep dive into that company. And like we talked about, we're very much overlapping in terms of our approach to investing, but we kind of have a slightly different take on it. So Alex really going into the details and the history of things. My podcast, myself and Hari, really going into kind of the numbers, and there's obviously good overlap, but also a little bit of distinct color. And so excited to showcase what this melding of the mind would look like in the next two episodes. So stay tuned, everybody.
Yeah, stay tuned. We're gonna really get into it. So
Awesome.
looking forward to it.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, Alex. And thank everybody. Thank everybody for listening. I'll see you guys in the next episode.